It's the 2022 World Cup. It's the squad update for USA. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Connor, and today we will be updating the USA squad for the 2022 World Cup.
Yes, we've done a podcast on the groups, which took a close look at USA's team, as well as a player mediacast, which went through each of the candidates for making the final squad. And that ended with a prediction of the starters. And in fact, there's short versions of each of those as well.
So this mediacast is an addendum to that. In other words, we won't be repeating all of the information we did in previous podcasts, but we'll simply be summarizing and adding on to it. It's not necessary to listen to previous versions, but the conclusions we draw here are both based on that information and explained in more detail here. So we recommend the full player podcast, but if we have time, we're hoping to release a player version focused solely on the final squad, giving the bios of just those 26 players.
Right, and the final squad has been released. Today we'll find out how accurate we were in our predictions. We're going to list the names of the candidates and then announce who made the preliminary squad. Well, there was none for the USA, but the names on the final roster.
And as we guessed, most squads had a few surprises, players who didn't make it and new or unexpected players who did. So we'll go over those players and summarize them again at the end.
Yes, and we'll also discuss whether the selections and the games played since June 2022 have changed our thoughts on our predicted starters and on the team's prospects. So let's begin, and I am repping the red, white, and blue in a kind of a pathetic sort of way that is a kind of confession that I don't have an American jersey, but I am squeezing in a Cardiff reference.
Oh, very good. I'm wearing a Cardiff jersey, which is perhaps more a reference to USA's group rivals, Wales, but I promise to maintain my neutrality through this.
Is it a threat, Connor?
It's a thinly veiled threat, I'll say that.
Okay. Well, we have a lot of work to do with the USA because they had 69 candidates on the roster, quite a bit more than most teams. So we'll be kind of hacking and hewing a bit here. And so we're going to move fairly swiftly. Let's begin with the formations that they used. We're focused really on the September games. So just let me post the list I have here. Actually, I don't have the regular list that we use, so I'll just post this one instead. And maybe you can take us through that.
Yeah, well, it's pretty straightforward. All through World Cup qualifying, USA played a 4-3-3. They continued with a 4-3-3 in their two most recent friendlies. That was a loss versus Japan and a draw with Saudi Arabia. 4-3-3 seems to be the nailed-on formation for the United States.
And just there in the Gold Cup, in a couple of games, the second and third group stage games, that's the only time they deviated from that 4-3-3, trying out a 3-4-1-2 in those games, but it seems like they didn't like it. What do you make of those scores in the friendlies? Do you attach much significance to that?
Normally not to friendly, but perhaps more so in a World Cup warm-up game. They failed to score and lost to teams that are not among, the most heavily favored at the World Cup in Japan and Saudi Arabia. So, yeah, a bit underwhelming, I would say, for the United States.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, let's move on to the squad and the analysis of the squad. So what we're going to do here is begin by naming the candidates, and then we'll say which ones made the squad, and we'll finish with a summary of the position. So this is pretty easy to do with the manager, Connor.
Yeah, Greg Berhalter, he's been the manager since 2018 and will lead them into this World Cup.
Yeah, so we will have him as having made the squad, as it were. Okay, let's turn our attention to goalkeepers.
Yeah, so we have a number of candidates. Under the definite category, we have Matt Turner, now with Arsenal. We had Zach Steffen as a likely candidate. For possible, we had Ethan Horvath, Sean Johnson, and David Ochoa. And for seems to be off the squad, we have Bill Hamid.
Okay, and we have a couple of notes because there's a surprise here. Matt Turner did make the squad. However, Zach Steffen did not. We'll come back to that. Instead, possible candidates Ethan Horvath and Sean Johnson made the squad. David Ochoa, the other possible candidate, didn't make it, and Bill Hammett also off the list here. So Zach Steffen, I'm going to highlight it in red because it's a surprise. What do you make of it?
Yeah, the former Man City goalie, or I guess current Man City goalie on loan to Middlesbrough. Yeah, he has 29 caps. He started 6 of the 19 games since the 2021 Gold Cup. So, yeah, it is a surprise. He seems to have been, relatively firmly established as a starter, though starting sometimes, but relatively established as a top 3 goalie for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the reason was nothing other than a selection decision. There's no injury involved or anything like that. In fact, Berhalter said he was heartbroken over it. However, I would say we predicted this kind of disappointment given the number of candidates they had and the type of reduction that they had to do. Well, yeah, maybe I'll leave it at that. Okay, let's move on, shall we?
Sure.
No, actually, I got to summarize the position. So the manager was giving hope to all 4 of them, actually, since the 2021 Gold Cup. So someone was bound for disappointment here. Turner had 11 starts, and as you mentioned, Zach Steffen had 6. While Horvath and Johnson each had 1 start. So I'm sure everyone expected one of those 2 to get cut. In terms of the September friendlies, it was Turner who started both. So, maybe there was a question as to who would be the starter, but not many predicted that Steffen would be let go altogether.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's move on to the defenders. So we'll begin with central defense here.
Sure. So for definite, we had Walker Zimmerman and Miles Robinson. We had one likely candidate that was Aaron Long. We actually had a fairly long list of other players. So for possible, we had Cameron Carter-Vickers, Mark McKenzie, Eric Palmer Brown, and Chris Richards. For possible but unlikely, we had Justin Shea, Henry Kessier, and Austin Trusty. And for seemed to be off the squad, we had Matt Miazga, Donovan Pines, John Brooks, and Omar Gonzalez. So a lot of names there.
Yeah, and we'll actually erase most of them here because making the squad, we have Walker Zimmerman. However, Miles Robinson, who we noted as an injury doubt in the previous podcast, proves injured and does not make the squad. We'll come back for a comment on that. Aaron Long does make the squad. And among the long list of other candidates, just Cameron Carter-Vickers, the possible candidate making the squad, and no one else. So we erase them all from the list. We do have a comment, though, on Miles Robinson. Do you want to tell us what happened to him?
Yeah, he was out for the June and September games with an Achilles tendon rupture. So this has been ongoing since May, and his return date is unknown. So obviously this injury is the reason he wasn't selected. All right, so maybe you want to summarize the position?
Yeah, several players tried out since the 2021 Gold Cup, but Zimmerman and Miles Robinson emerged until Robinson there got injured for the games. So Aaron Long replaced him, and I'm kind of looks like Aaron Long is the only candidate apart from Cameron Carter-Vickers who really can move in to replace there.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, let's move on to the left backs, and we'll begin just by listing the candidates we came up with.
Yeah, so for definite, we had Anthony Robinson, who plays for Fulham. For possible, we had George Bello And for seems to be off the squad, we had Jonathan Gomez, Sam Vines, and Tim Ream.
Okay, well, a few surprises here too. Our definite candidate, Anthony Robinson, did make the squad, but we have a comment on him. George Bello did not make the squad. He was only a possible candidate, so not a huge surprise. Jonathan Gomez not making the squad. Sam Vines not making the squad, but an injury played a role. And finally, Tim Ream, the seems to be off the squad player, selected for the squad. So we have a couple of comments there. Do you want to go back and do those ones?
Yeah, so for Anthony Robinson, an ankle injury kept him out of the September friendlies, but it only kept him out for 3 weeks. It just happened to fall on the international break. So he started regularly for Fulham since, so an injury doubt that really they don't have to worry about. And then for Tim Ream, that was a surprise, as we had him, it seems to be off the squad. We have him as a left defender, but he can play central defense, so maybe he is kind of brought in to cover in the central defender position, which we noted they were a little short on.
Yeah, and I will just make a comment on Sam Vines, even though we had him as seemingly off the squad. He got a recent injury, very recent, in early November with a tibia fracture. That's an unknown return date, but clearly he's out of the cup. Sadly, though, he was brought back in as a starter for the September friendly, so kind of his hopes raised up and dashed. The poor guy, he also suffered a collarbone fracture in the fall of 2021. So he's struggling through his career.
Yeah. Do you want to summarize the position then?
Yeah, so various players tried out since the 2021 Gold Cup, but Anthony Robinson seemed ever more likely until he was injured for those September friendlies. Fortunately, though, he came back. And as we said, Vines suffering the ups and downs there. And excuse me, right defender Dest actually played the second of the September friendlies.
Yeah, a bit unsettled, it seems.
All right. Let's move on to right backs and look at the candidates.
Yeah, so we had 3 likely candidates, beginning with the aforementioned Serginho Dest. We also have DeAndre Yedlin and Reggie Cannon, all of them likely candidates. Possible candidate, we had Joe Scally. Possible but unlikely, we had Shaquille Moore. And then seems to be off the squad, we have Julian Araujo, Brooks Lennon, and Brian Reynolds.
All right, so a whole host of candidates to deal with, but not many of them made it. Sergio Dest and DeAndre Yedlin, no surprise, they were likely. However, the other likely candidate, Reggie Cannon, not making it. He was another player who was kind of out of the picture and then brought back into the picture, only to suffer the disappointment of not making the squad. Joe Scally, the possible candidate, did make the squad, and the possible but unlikely Shaquille Moore also made the squad. The other 3, Julian Araujo, Brooks Lennon, Brian Reynolds, none of them making the squad.
Yeah, so 4 right backs coming, but possibly some will move around. But do you want to summarize the position?
Yeah, sure. So this has been really a juggling act since the 2021 Gold Cup. Serginho Dest and Yedlin seeming the more likely in terms of starts, but other players used towards the end caused a bit of confusion, especially Reggie Cannon kind of coming back into the picture. Dest and Yedlin each started the September friendlies, but Dest actually started both one time on the left side.
Yeah, and I will mention the possible but unlikely candidates, Joe Scally and Shaquille Moore, have just 7 caps between them.
Wow.
So not a lot of experience, which is partly why we didn't have them higher up the list.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually there is a note on Reggie Cannon, kind of a reason why he wasn't chosen. He had played only 10 games with his club, and apparently he was trying to move to a bigger club than Boa Vista in Portugal, but wasn't able to make that happen. So that was the reason kind of given for his non-selection. But let's move on to the defensive midfielders and look at the candidates there.
Yeah, so just two to speak about. The first is Tyler Adams, the Leeds United defender, midfielder. We had him as definite, and for possible, we had James Sands.
All right. Well, Tyler Adams did make the squad, and James Sands did not. So we delete him from the list. And in summary of the position, let's go through the central midfielders first, because we usually summarize defensive and central together.
Yeah. No definites in central mid, but a couple of likelies. We had Kellen Acosta and Christian Roldan. No possibles either, but a couple names still to mention. Possible but unlikely. We had Sebastian Claggett, Gianluca Busio, and Johnny Cardozo. For seems to be off the squad, we had Cole Bassett, Eric Williamson, and Jackson Ewell. And as a retired player, we'll mention Michael Bradley.
Yes, we talked about a lot of the veterans being retired. We'll talk about that a bit later. In terms of the players who made the squad, it's just the first two, Kellen Acosta and Christian Roldan, both making the final squad. Possible but unlikely, Sebastian Leggett, Gianluca Busio, and Johnny Cardozo not making the squad. And seems to be off the squad, Cole Bassett, Eric Williamson, Jason Ewell not making the squad. And of course, Michael Bradley, been a while since he was off the squad.
All right. Do you want to summarize the position of defensive and central midfield?
Right. So we're down to just three candidates there. So if you think about the USA formation of 4-3-3, it's just the one center player in the midfield, and it was almost always Tyler Adams. So one of the few positions that has really been nailed down on the USA team, and Adams furthermore started both September friendlies. Kellen Acosta seems a possible starter on the field. He started as a right midfielder in the September friendly, and that kept up his record of starting around half the time. But we'll come back to that at the end when we go over who we think are going to be the starters. And meanwhile, we'll move on here to the left midfield.
Yeah, so these would be the players playing beside the central midfielder in a 4-3-3 position. We identified Christian Pulisic in the left midfield position, but we're actually going to move him now to kind of a left attacking midfield position. So we'll talk about Christian Pulisic later. So we don't have anyone specifically identified in the left midfield. But on the right midfield, we do have a couple names. For likely candidates, we have Luca Della Torre and Weston McKennie. Yeah, that's it for the right central midfield.
Okay, well, we'll go back over the... we'll name who made the squad. So we're going to move Christian Pulisic there to, as Connor said, right or left attacking midfielder / left forward. And Luca Della Torre did make the squad. So the likely right midfielder, and Weston McKennie also selected for the squad. Okay, and we'll talk about the positions. First, the left midfielder position. It's been played by a vast array of players. Ironically, everyone except the only player coded as the left midfielder, Christian Pulisic. So in general, it was... right midfielder McKennie towards the beginning, and then honestly after that there were too many players to discern a pattern. So in addition to the several attacking midfielders or defensive midfielders, we also had Musa moving over from the right to the left side. However, perhaps a hint of the starting lineup, it was Weston McKennie in both of the September friendlies. So we may have to recode him as a left midfielder later on. In terms of the right midfield position, again, a wide array of players since the 2021 Gold Cup. However, the right winger Musa increasingly made the position his own until the June games, where 4 different players started each of the 4 June games. And that confusion continued into September, with only one of those 4 starting in the September games. So in September, it was De La Torre and central roving midfielder Kellen Acosta, each starting 1. So a lot of confusion there in those 2 positions, Connor.
Yeah, different players being tried in and out. But yeah, an important position for the United States, of course, given that their 4-3-3 preferred formation seems that they will be filling those positions for the tournament.
Let's move on to the left wingers, and can you introduce the candidates?
Yeah, no definite candidates, but a likely one in Paul Areola. And then impossible but unlikely, we have Conrad de la Fuente.
All right. Well, actually, neither of these players made the squad. And I have to read an article about Paul Areola, and he said some things that I think I want to read, just because it really kind of puts a face on it. So we predicted disappointment given the number of candidates that the manager was juggling. And I think Areola's tweet really brought this to life. So he said, the past few days have been extremely difficult, some of the hardest I've had in a while. I am heartbroken not to be included on the final World Cup roster. And he went on, this year was my goal to put myself in the best position to get to this point. And I believe I did. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough. So despite his comma splice in his tweet, I feel for him, and I admire his encouraging comments that he made towards the end of that. But I do think he's one of the many players whose hopes were raised and then dashed. He started actually 4 games in the period we're talking about, and also subbed into 4 of the games to June 2022. And even at the very end, he subbed in for 60 minutes of the final game in September. So a bit of a heartbreaking message, and it kind of, what do you make of it, Connor?
Yeah, like you said, it kind of puts a human face on it. And I think it's difficult. I mean, we talked in our previous podcast about how many players the managers brought in and out and chopping and changing, and clearly Areola had felt he'd done enough playing in the most recent friendlies, so it would have come as a shock. But we saw that with some other positions as well. So I think it's just a difficult thing to manage when you have that number of players. But yeah, for those who do miss out, you certainly feel bad for them, especially when it comes as an unpleasant surprise.
Yeah, and I also feel bad about my comma splice comment, but I can't help it. I'm an English teacher. Okay, let's move on to right wingers and look at the candidates there.
All right, so as a definite candidate, we had Yunus Musa. As a possible candidate, we had Giassi Zardes. And then seems to be off the squad, we had Jonathan Lewis.
All right, and in this case, Yunus Musa did make the squad. However, Giassi Zardes did not, and nor did Jonathan Lewis. So just Yunus Musa here. And in a summary of the position, again, the position is not used in the 4-3-3. I didn't summarize that with the left wingers, but it would be the same. In the left winger case, Areola was starting as a right forward when he started, and actually on my source he has been recoded as a right winger. But Yunus Musa was a right midfielder here, even though he's coded as a right winger, and he was starting there consistently, kind of from about halfway through the period up until the June friendlies. Not always as a right midfielder, in fact, sometimes switching to the left. However, he wasn't called up for the September games there. So we'll come back and talk about him as a possible starter. Giassi Zardi should probably have been in the category of forwards, but he didn't make the squad, so we just kept him here to finish the conversation. Okay, and we're going to move on to midfielders. We're going to move on to forwards and begin our discussion with central attacking midfielders.
Right. So as a definite candidate, we had Leeds United's Brendan Aronson. No likely candidates to mention, but a couple of possibles in Malik Tillman and Caden Clark.
I think you Malik Tillman and
Giovanni Reyna.
Right.
That's right. And then Caden Clark should have been possible, but unlikely. Yeah, thanks for the correction.
Yeah, no problem.
As well, a couple that seem to be off the squad. That's Efrain Alvarez and George Mihailovic. Maybe you can talk about who made it.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'll just say the position of attacking midfielder, central attacking midfielder, doesn't exist in the 4-3-3. So these players we're talking about will be distributed elsewhere. And in terms of who made it, Brendan Aronson selected for the squad. Malik Tillman, the possible candidate, was not selected, but Giovanni Reyna was. Fans familiar with the USA team may question why we had him just as a possible candidate, but we'll come back to that. Meanwhile, Caden Clark, Efrain Alvarez, and Georgi Mihailovic, none of them selected for the final squad. So we do have a note on Giovanni Reyna. Do you want to handle that one?
Yeah, so Reyna was injured throughout the fall of 2021 and basically came back for a few March games only to be injured for the June games. Both times it was a muscle injury. So he's a bit of a surprise selection, really, given his absences, but his club affiliation, playing for Borussia Dortmund, or perhaps being the son of a very famous American player, presumably made up the difference.
I think he's been playing well on at the club level. Just strictly on the national team level, he's played many or very few games, just starting one and subbing in for three. But as you said, injured for most of those matches. However, he did start both of the September friendlies, perhaps a sign that he not only has made the squad, but could be a starter potentially. Aronson has played all over the field as a right midfielder, left midfielder, right forward, and a left forward. So a very versatile player there. Okay, let's move on to the left attacking midfielder, left forward position in the 4-3-3.
Yeah, so we had moved Christian Pulisic here, so we'll mention him now. And really, we had him as a definite candidate. Of course, he plays for Chelsea in the Premier League.
Yeah, that's right. And all the other candidates we have here are actually coded as attacking midfielders or forwards, something like that. But Christian Pulisic did make the squad, unsurprisingly. And let's mention a little bit about the position. So it is a left forward role in the 4-3-3 that they use, and it was Pulisic more than half the times, but a number of other players have stepped into the role, most notably Brendan Aronson. Giovanni Reyna stepped into the role for the first September friendly, and it was Pulisic for the second game. All right, moving on to right attacking midfielders / right forward. Who do we have?
Yeah, as a definite candidate, we have Timothy Weah.
Actually, I think we're moving him to the from the forward position to the right attacking midfielder. So that's the only one we have.
Yeah, that's right. Just Timothy Weah.
Okay, and Timothy Weah did make the squad, but there is a comment on him. Do you want to tell us that?
Yeah, so he had a foot injury that was picked up in late August that kept him out of the first September friendly. But he recovered right around that time. It wasn't listed as injured for the second, but he hadn't been called up. He has played for his club since. And I guess if we're talking about Reina being the son of a famous footballer, I guess we should mention the same thing for Timothy Weah.
That's right. Not a United States forward, but do you want to tell us? Do you know about the father?
Yeah, so of course his father is George Weah, who a Liberian international, and is actually the president of Liberia right now. Then he made his career in Europe, but yeah, his son has played or elects to play for the United States.
Right, Liberia having a bit of a connection with the United States historically. Anyway, in terms of summarizing the position, Weah increasingly started as the right forward in the last half of the period since the 2021 Gold Cup to June 2022. Again, though, several candidates have been there, including Paul Areola and Aronson. In the September friendlies, it was Brendan Aronson once and Reina once. Weah was injured, actually, as you said, for the first friendly and not called up, probably recovering for the second one. So leaving us, I guess, in a bit of flux as to who the starter's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Finally, we move on to the forward line and a whole bunch of candidates to introduce here.
Yeah, in all different categories. So actually, except for definite, we didn't identify anyone as a definite, but we did have as likely candidates Jesus Ferreira and Jordan Morris. For possible candidates, we had Ricardo Pepi, Haji Wright, and Jordan Sabachu. For possible but unlikely, we had Cade Cowell. And then we had a couple players who seemed to be off the squad, including Daryl Dike, Matthew Hoppy, Nicholas Giacchini, and Josh Sargent. And then we'll mention Josie Altidore as a retired player.
Right. And we also had a bit of an injury concern with Jordan Pefok or Jordan Sabachu. Actually, on a couple of sources now, I see he's just called Jordan, which...
interesting.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, well, the selections here are pretty interesting. So we have likely candidate Jesus Ferreira making the squad, as well as Jordan Morris. So the two likely candidates making it. Ricardo Pepi not making the squad, but Haji Wright did make it. And Jordan Pefok or Sabachu or just Jordan, we won't have to struggle with that name issue because he didn't make it. Cade Cowell also not selected, and none of the others. Daryl Dike, Matthew Hoppy, Nicholas Giacchini, and Josh. Those three not making it, but Josh Sargent being selected for the final squad. So definitely a bit of a surprise there, hey?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, well, let us go back. Actually, we do have a couple of notes. So,
I can take us through those.
Sure, great.
So yeah, for Ricardo Pepi, some articles described him as being snubbed. However, we only had him as a possible candidate. He came in hot to the United States and I believe in his club play also, but he cooled off last year for both. So again, for us, that's why we only had him as possible. Jordan Sabachu, injury doesn't seem to have been a factor with him. He started the season in hot form, but he also cooled off. But there were some pundits who expected him to be selected. And then with Josh Sargent, I'll just mention that he'd started only 2 of their 19 games since the 2021 Gold Cup. He was subbed in for 1, but not selected for the last 16 matches. So yeah, not a lot of recent involvement and kind of brought in a little bit from the cold, you could say.
Definitely. The biggest surprise for me, I was wondering if you had any insight, being a closer follower of the championship. Did he have particularly good form, or am I putting you on the spot there?
I mean, of course, he was relegated from the Premiership to the Championship with Norwich. As far as I can tell, nothing too hot from him this year with Norwich. Actually, I'm just looking now. I guess he does have 9 goals across 19 appearances, so that's not bad.
Yeah.
But of course, playing at a lower level than he was previously.
Yeah, he certainly struggled when Norwich was in the Premier League, and that's probably why he kind of lost his position with the squad, as well as struggling to score against the USA, which takes us to our summary of the position. So really, this forward position has been a mad scramble to find the player who will put the ball in the net for them. And they went through players as if they were trying out keys to unlock a door, discarding them when they didn't work. So Pepe worked for a little while during qualification there, and then he didn't. And in the end, in June with Ferreira, Ferreira played 3 of the last 4 friendlies in June, and I don't think they were all friendlies, but games in June. And Haji Wright played the last one, so kind of trying out new players right up until the last minute. Now, Jesus Ferreira did score 4 goals, but all of them were in a 5-0 win over Grenada. And that was actually a Nations League game. But otherwise, he didn't score. And after starting the first September friendly, he also seemed discarded, subbed out at halftime of that game, and then not starting the second match. Now, it does seem like they did, if I continue with the analogy, pick up a couple of keys and some of the discarded keys and try them again. Pepe was picked up and tried, kind of further to your comment in the article. He was used in the September friendly, but he didn't score. So maybe that was the final kind of decision for Berhalter to not bring him. And we see that, he kind of picked up the key with Josh Sargent there too. So returning to some of the players. But the ultimate problem is that they just can't seem to find a center forward who reliably scores for them.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next section, the statistics. And do you want to take us through some of those?
Yeah, so their average age is 25.2 years. They have 2 players who are 33 or older, but 8 players 22 or younger. So, yeah, all those stats point to kind of in general a team on the younger end.
Yeah, we saw actually that they kind of discarded a lot of their veterans like Josie Altidore and this was actually before qualification. Guys like Michael Bradley and Josie Altidore. We had a long list of them in the Full Player podcast. Kind of funny that they brought back Tim Ream. Do you see a reason for that?
I mean, he's playing well with Fulham in the Premier League, but obviously they needed cover with central defense. I mean, the loss of Robinson is a big blow, but yeah, that's all I can think of. But yeah, he's 35 years old, so
yeah. Okay, I got a bit off topic there. He actually is like 5 years older than the next oldest player, Aaron Long, at 30 years old. We do have Sean Johnson, the goalkeeper, in the middle. How about the lower end of the scale?
Yeah, so there's 2 teenagers, Joe Scally and Yunus Musa, and then 20-year-old Giovanni Reina, and 21-year-old Jesus Ferreira. So they do have some youngsters. Some of them, though, like Aronson, Dest, Tyler Adams, fairly well established in the squad. So maybe that youth is a benefit to the States there.
Yeah, I mean, definitely looking promising for the future. These youngsters, not only getting in with the squad, but with some impressive clubs in England, in Europe, and elsewhere. So things looking good for the future there. In terms of average caps, well, it is a young squad. 25.2 is actually exceptionally young because we're finding the average age to be 26.8 here, so a full year younger. That would mean every player on the team a year younger than every player on the other teams. I'm not sure whether that analogy is working. Okay. So maybe you can cover average caps. With the younger team, we would expect the number of caps to be a bit lower.
Yeah, and then the average there is 26.3, with a couple players 3 players actually with single-digit caps.
Right. Who are the most capped players on the team?
DeAndre Yedlin is the most with 75, and then Kellen Acosta and Christian Pulisic have 53 and 52 respectively.
Oh, okay. And yeah, I'm just kind of filling in the stats here. We have 2 players who are 33 or older, and meanwhile we have 8 players who are 22 or younger. So, but actually that experience isn't bad. The average is 34.6 among the teams I've done so far. They are the second lowest, tied with, I'll give you a guess, but I know you're never going to get it.
Tunisia.
No, Netherlands. That was a surprise to me. Anyway, it doesn't seem to matter that much. Total goals for USA is 82 amongst all of these players, and we'll put that into a bit more perspective with a percentage that in itself doesn't mean much. It's total goals per cap, and USA is 12%. The average is 12.8%, so this is slightly below average and kind of fits in with our view, at least, of their struggling center forward. Do you think America is a team that has trouble putting the ball in the net?
Yeah, potentially. Christian Pulisic has 21 goals and 52 caps. That's a 40% goal rate. And Jesus Ferreira has 7 and 15 for 46. Other than that, most of the players all the players, with kind of a respectable number of caps are below 30%. So then you're looking at kind of, other than those 2 players, kind of 1 in 4, 1 goal in 4 game type players. So yeah, I think overall it's a bit of a problem for the States. They have players who can score, don't get me wrong, but yeah, a little bit lower than average, and I think we see it in some of the individual numbers.
Yeah, that's my take on it too. Like, the numbers are not very good for the forwards, the center forwards, but they are getting goals from other places on the field. Some of them pretty respectable. So, yeah, just that center forward problem seems the main issue. All right, let's move on to some summaries. So really just going over some names that we've mentioned in the podcast, but just to kind of put it all in a package here. And we begin with notable non-selections.
Yeah, probably the most notable is Zach Steffen, who we had considered likely. But also Paul Areola is in that category as well as a likely candidate. And Ricardo Pepi, we considered impossible, but again, some people and pundits expected him to make it, so we'll include him in our short list here.
Yeah, not really our call, but something that we've read about in articles. All right, how about surprise inclusions?
Yeah, so Tim Ream is a big surprise. Like we said, kind of coming back out of the cold, the veteran defender, as well as Shaquille Moore. We considered impossible but unlikely, but he did make the team.
Yeah, and we have a beef against him because he was the guy who scored 20 seconds into that game against Canada in the Gold Cup. Grrr.
Yes, I remember that.
We have one more that I added to the list just at the end there, and that is actually Josh Sargent.
Oh, right.
Yeah, who we had as seemingly off the team. Okay, how about new players?
No new players. Everyone included in the squad was somebody that we had on our list already. So that means we don't have any new players to talk about.
Yeah, in truth, it was a pretty extensive list. So it would almost be shocking if they were adding to the 69 players that we had. Let's do an update on injuries. And we've got 4 categories here. First one is recovered from injury.
Yeah, so there we have Anthony Robinson, Giovanni Reyna, and Timothy Weah.
Okay, well, 3 pretty big players, and I'm sure they're delighted to have Giovanni Reyna back. I'm kind of anxious to see what he's like because I haven't really seen him in action, well, especially for the USA team.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to go ahead?
Just to mention on the graphics, just to move those to the recovered from injury tab.
Okay.
But our next category is an injury doubt, though they're still on the roster. And there we have Luca Della Torre.
Yeah, I'm not sure we actually talked about this one above.
Yeah, so it was a recent injury from late October. There wasn't really no definite return date, but it obviously can't be too serious because he was selected, even with this kind of lingering injury.
Right. Okay, and then we have players that they have lost due to injury.
Yeah, only one, but it's a noticeable one, and that's central defender Miles Robinson.
Yes, and we actually do divide kind of key injuries like Miles Robinson to injuries to players who were not strong candidates to begin with.
Yeah.
So do you want to just take us through the names there?
Yeah, and that's Chris Richards and Sam Vines.
All right. All right. Well, we're going to finish the podcast by going through the list one more time and predicting the starters. So let's begin with the manager.
Yeah, so Greg Berhalter, starting in that, he will be the manager at the World Cup.
Okay, and let's first of all list the candidates, and then I'll make a comment.
Yeah, so for goalkeepers, we had Matt Turner, Ethan Horvath, and Sean Johnson.
Right, and at the end of the previous podcast, we had thought it a battle between Turner and Stefan, and we kind of predicted a rotating position, but we did note that we slightly favored Turner as the starter, and obviously Turner is now clearly the favorite with Stefan not selected, and starting both of the September games there seems to dry that in cement. All right, central defenders.
Yeah, so here we have just three: Walker Zimmerman, Aaron Long, and Cameron Carter-Vickers.
Right. Well, we landed on Zimmerman and Miles Robinson as the definite starters, but we did have the caveat that Robinson's recovery from injury was a factor, and it turns out he did not recover from injury. So Long seems the most likely replacement, and he did start alongside Zimmerman in both September friendlies. Any objections there, Connor?
No objections. I think those are the two most likely to start.
Are you surprised that they have so few central defenders, especially with Robinson injured?
I am surprised. You see a lot of teams picking 5, some even picking 6. I mean, we don't expect the USA to necessarily play with 3 at the back, and we know there's a couple other defenders who are a bit versatile. But yeah, I am a little surprised. 3 kind of natural center defenders doesn't quite seem like enough.
Yeah, well, we'll keep an eye out for the players coming up here and see if any of them could kind of fill in as a centre back. Left back, we have two players who made the squad.
Yeah, that's Anthony Robinson and Tim Ream.
Okay, and as a starter, we had Robinson. Pretty confident there in Anthony Robinson as a starter, and we remain confident of that, even though he did miss the September friendlies there.
That's right.
Okay, moving on to right backs.
So right backs, a bit more crowded. We have Serginho Dest, DeAndre Yedlin, Joe Scally, and Shaquille Moore.
Okay, and we at the end of the last podcast had Dest and Yedlin as kind of alternating, or at least we couldn't decide between them. We do think maybe Dest has a bit of an edge after the September games, given that he started both of them, whereas Yedlin only started one on his side of the field. So we're going to code those as yellow.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, let's move on to central and defensive midfielders.
All right. So we have Tyler Adams, Kellen Acosta, and Christian Roldan.
Right. Okay. So again, just one in the center of that 4-3-3, and it was almost always Tyler Adams. So we think Tyler Adams is a shoe-in for that. One of the few positions actually that is really clear. The defense seems to be quite clear, actually, Connor, but the offense not so clear.
Yeah. I agree.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just going to say I agree with Tyler Adams, but yeah, whoever's playing in the central, kind of beside the central mid, might, we might see a couple people even out of position there.
Yeah, well, I was going to nominate Kellen Acosta as a starter, not necessarily in that position, but elsewhere. He did start as a right midfielder in the second September friendly, keeping up his record of starting around half of the game. So you tempted to put him in as a sometime starter, yellow?
Yeah, I think yellow is a safe bet.
Okay, let's go with that. And move on to, well, we'll do left and right midfielders in one breath because we don't have any left midfielders.
Yeah, so on the right we have Luca Della Torre and Weston McKennie.
Okay, well, we do have the positions though in the 4-3-3. So we didn't hazard a guess in the previous podcast because there were so many candidates available. Although the right midfielder, McKennie, who we had seen as a sometimes starter, strengthened his bid by starting both September friendlies as a left midfielder.
Yeah, so I'd be inclined to put him in the starting position. Do you agree?
I do, not necessarily on the left midfield, but starting somewhere on the field or somewhere in the midfield.
Yeah.
There. Okay, right midfielders. Well, you mentioned the candidate, but actually it's right winger Musa Tor, right winger Yunus Musa, was laying claim to the position in early 2022. But 5 different players, as we noted, have played the position over the last 6 games. So quite chaotic here. Are you tempted to go back to Musa, as I think we did at the end of the last podcast?
I'm inclined to lean there, but with so much change, I'm not sure I would say anything confidently enough to label anybody a starter.
Can I persuade you towards a sometime starter for Musa?
Yes, that I'm easily persuaded.
Yeah, okay. But even with that, I think we might be surprised again. The number of players they have coming in and out of the position could leave kind of anyone out in the cold. Let's move on to attacking midfielders.
Yeah, so we have Brendan Aronson and Giovanni Reyna.
Right, and we had nominated Brendan Aronson as a starter. He's certainly versatile, starting all over the field. So they actually don't have a central attacking midfielder position, but he plays all over the field. However, he did only start 9 of their 19 games and only 3 of their last 6. Including 1 of the 2 in September. So kind of like Kellen Acosta, regularly starting half of the game. So I'm tempted to downgrade him to a possible starter here.
Yeah, I think his form with Leeds has been good, and that could persuade him to start. But yeah, possible starter does seem like a fair fit given those stats.
Yeah, we also have Giovanni Reyna here. I think Reyna is possible as a left forward or a right forward, since he started both September games, both of the September friendlies, once in each of those roles. Do you think that's going to make him a starter?
It's hard to judge off 2 games. I mean, he is player with kind of a good club affiliation and good pedigree, as we mentioned. So I would probably put him as a sometime starter, but it is crowded. There's lots of candidates, so I'm not sure I would say a definite.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, let's wait until we go through the next 2 positions and kind of see if there's room for him. As you say, it's kind of hard when he's just come back into the squad to judge on the 2 games. But on the left side, we have Christian. Sorry, that's you who's supposed to introduce. Who do we have on the left side?
Left side, we have Christian Pulisic.
Phew, thanks for getting me through that. So we had Pulisic as a starter, despite the fact that he only actually started about half the games. And our opinion hasn't changed, even though his fitness is a concern with the lack of starts at Chelsea.
Yeah, nothing to add. I do think he'll be starting.
Okay. On the right, who do we have?
We just have Timothy Weah.
Okay, and yes, we did have Weah as the starter there at the end of the last podcast, the full-length podcast. But recent developments have have us downgrading him to a possible. This is not only his missing the September friendlies, but the specter of Giovanni Reyna taking over the position. So let's talk about them in tandem, Timothy Weah, Giovanni Reyna, or possibly even Reyna stealing a start from Christian Pulisic. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, both Reyna and Weah are young players. I think likely Berhalter will go with the experience of Pulisic, but I would say Reyna and Timothy Weah would both make cases as sometimes starters.
Okay, yes, as I said, we did have Weah as a starter at the end of the last podcast, but with Reyna coming back and Weah not playing as much, I agree with you there. So sometimes starter for both. Let's finish with the center forwards.
Yeah, position that we noted they struggled with. We have Jesus Ferreira, Jordan Morris, Haji Wright, and Josh Sargent.
Yes, and well, we talked about the struggle here that they've had to find a forward. So my comment on this one is actually there is no starting forward, but it's there for the taking for the first player who proves to be a scorer. Any guess as to who that might be? I mean, they brought in Haji Wright exactly for this reason, because he's in form. Possibly brought Josh Sargent back for that. That's what they always seem to be looking for, is someone who's in form.
Well, let's just say that they didn't score in either of their friendlies, so the search continues. So I really don't know who it's going to be.
Well put, and honestly, like, Japan's a pretty good defensive team. I guess Saudi Arabia is too, but if they're not scoring against those teams, it makes you a bit worried about whether they're going to score, against the teams that they face in the Cup. Iran has a very solid defense.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, we'll finish with some closing thoughts, and rather than repeat the long discussion we had about America's prospects in the team podcast, we're kind of focusing our attention on this question. Does the selection change our opinion about their chances?
Yeah, I mean, not for me. I was kind of, my thought last time was, they haven't really settled on a team and on players. That was kind of my main, or really both of our main takeaways. I think some of the decisions that we've seen for the September games, where players who played weren't selected, new players came in. I think that kind of continues. I think the lack of a forward is going to be an issue against good defensive teams. Iran is good, but so is Wales, both very strong defensively. So I just feel that the US aren't quite settled enough on a team, and I don't really see them as having the squad to get out of the group. And I think we can mention too that they're qualifying for this tournament. Wasn't fabulous. Friendly results haven't been fabulous. They haven't shown the form as a team that they kind of would want going into the World Cup.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I think it's not so much the selection of players. In fact, I'm kind of stunned by the, I think I said in the previous podcast that Jurgen Klinsmann was urging players to try and get over to Europe to play. Well, they've certainly done that here. They have players playing with some of the top clubs over there. So it's not so much the talent on the squad. It's maybe bringing it all together, which I'm not sure Berhalter has done that well with his chopping and changing. So I actually think that that's going to have an effect on them. I think, honestly, for 2026, they'll be a much better team and a big threat. But for this one, they kind of seem all over the place to me, and I would worry about that. So I got to say, it does affect my decision in that I think, I used to give them a chance for taking that second spot. I would downgrade that a little bit and say I don't really see them as the second best team in this group.
Yeah, I mean, they do have some fabulous young players, who we mentioned in this podcast, who I think will be kind of coming into their prime in 2026. But as you alluded to, we've kind of been waiting for the US to get going, whether that's through qualification or friendlies. and they really haven't. I mean, they had 14 games of qualification and kind of middling results, so I don't think they found the correct formula yet. And I think what this squad shows is that they still haven't found it. They still aren't quite settled on their best team, and yeah, I think that's not what you want going into a big tournament.
Yeah, well, one mitigating factor is the USA's constant ability to surprise. So they really do have the talent to do that. So I wouldn't be shocked to see them, kind of bringing it all together here. But from the position we're at right now, it looks a less organized team than they've taken into previous tournaments.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that brings us to the end of the podcast. So keep in mind, we may be editing together a list of the bios of the 26 final candidates here. That mostly will be outtakes from the full-length podcast rather than a separate podcast that we make. And if we do it, it'll come out in the first few days of the Cup. I personally would like to have a kind of a list of players to go over as I drive to my brother's place, your dad's place, to watch most of the games.
Yeah. And meanwhile, keep an eye on us at Soccer Files Canada. That's Soccer Files with a PH in the middle and an S at the end. And our website, soccerfiles.captivate.fm. And check our show notes for links to our website and previous podcast series.
All right. Well, thank you for listening, and we hope you join us in our next mediacast.
Bye.
Bye-bye.